Hello, everyone. Once again, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on where you are. And I would just like to mention something that I said in another course that I'm teaching at the same time the other day, and some of you might have heard that suggestion already, but I'm just going to repeat it here as well. One very respected teacher in the Korean Sun tradition of Buddhism, whose interviews I received a lot of benefit from, once mentioned that in her life, some of the most helpful practice for difficult periods of time was the practice she would do during the night. And that can mean, of course, many different things. For some of us, that would imply that we're just going to bed a bit later and we're doing some practice before we're going to sleep. For some others, depending on your habits and preferences, it would mean that you're getting up early and you're practicing something like the 4 Immeasurables to establish that truly profound and truly vast motivation connected with the benefit of all beings, or directed at the benefit for all beings. And some people would actually prefer to get up in the middle of the night, do some practice, and they'll go back to bed. So of course, it's very individual. There are many options, and it is a creative thing in many regards. But in addition to that, I think it's important that we know that sometimes we have this opportunity to do a little bit of practice in an unusual time period, in an unusual time slot. Yes, we do meditations during the day. We do meditation together in classes such as this one. We watch recordings of retreats and courses and guided sessions. We listen to recordings on SoundCloud and Insight Timer and all these other platforms. And yet, there's also a little bit of creativity involved in all of this. So if we're feeling like the reality around us is spinning out of control, we're losing it, we're not connected to our deepest aspirations, maybe there's something happening in our family life, maybe there's something happening in us, and that we don't feel grounded, we don't feel like we know our purpose, or we're not feeling connected to a sense of purpose. In those situations, in situations like that, doing a little bit of practice when the world is still and asleep. And of course, it's not the whole world, where it all exists in different time zones, but just the world around us is in that nighttime mode where everything is still and quiet. It is an opportunity to embrace that creative darkness, that silence, stillness, and spaciousness naturally present in the environment around us. And through that, connect in that dark period of the day to connect to our own luminous nature, which of course includes the aspirations of the 4 Immeasurables. And there are many practices that we could do at that time, but some of them would be connected to loving kindness and therefore generating vast aspirations for the benefit and happiness of all beings. Some of them would be connected to compassion, some to joy, which is a wonderful thing to practice during the night, and so forth. There's so many options, of course. Aspiration prayers in different traditions, depending on what we believe in, or even simply reconnecting with the foundation and we absolutely will be talking about different ways of practicing loving kindness today, not just on our cushion. But for now, to begin this session, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you, let's find a comfortable stationary position so that we can do a little bit of formal meditation together. And once again, we can find a comfortable stationary position that would be upright, and that we're sitting with our spine straight, with our legs crossed or uncrossed, with feet flat on the ground, or it can be the supine position, because once again, what better way to show kindness to ourselves than to choose a posture, choose a position that truly works for us right now. And maybe we've just had a hard day full of work and our back is tired. So we would be perfectly happy to meditate in the Shavasana posture. Also a possibility. But whichever position it is, whichever position works for our body right now, with kindness for ourselves, with a lot of gentle care, we can assume it, and then we can bring our awareness into the body, into the appearances of the body, the sensations, the feelings associated with the body, quite literally how the body feels right now in terms of being connected to the element of the earth, in terms of feeling that support underneath us. And that's what we start to explore. And tending to the sensations in our feet, in our pelvic floor, the backside of our legs, maybe our lower back. Breathing naturally, as in allowing our body to breathe naturally without any control from our side. Choosing the optimal rhythm, depth, volume of breathing. And as we rest in this mode of gently attending to the body, we can do an abbreviated body scan where we explore some of the key parts of the body, explore the sensations in those parts, and we release the physical tension when that's available to us. So in that spirit, we spend some time with our feet and toes, attending and relaxing, if that's available to us. And then some time with our pelvic floor and the muscles around that whole area, the area of our thighs, our buttocks. Then exploring our hands and fingers with care and curiosity, checking if there's any tension, any leftover movement, any restlessness in this area. And when that's possible, relaxing it. The same for our shoulders. Hopefully deeply relaxed, just resting there, not experiencing any physical tension. And finally, our face. This vast field of physical sensations, which correspond to our ability to use facial expressions to communicate with others. a field of vibrant energy that we can use to communicate. And that in this case, right now, we can deeply relax. All of this while continuing to breathe naturally. And then extending our awareness to all the parts of the body, to the body as this vast field of sensations. And while observing these sensations with a light touch, also noticing the stillness behind and beyond all the movements, the underlying quality of stillness in which our body can become truly relaxed, still, and yet vigilant, truly awake. And then on the basis of this relaxed, still and vigilant state of our body, relaxed, stable and clear state of our mind, we can generate a beautiful, vast, and profound motivation for this session in general, for this specific session of practice, and of course for our contemplative practice in this life in general. Everything that we do in the domains of spirituality or psychology. What is it that we truly want to bring about through our practice? What are the goals and the aspirations that we're trying to fulfill for ourselves and for the benefit of others? Bringing these wishes, these aspirations to mind, and directing our practice towards them, so that every moment of this meditation and everything else we do in this session might contribute to those goals being fulfilled. Those aspirations being fulfilled for the benefit of all beings. With this motivation as the foundation, we will briefly turn to the practice of attentional training that we have discussed, training in samadhi or mental composure, mental stability. And for that, we bring our attention to all the sensations that change in our body with each inhalation and with each exhalation. The changing sensations that accompany the process of breathing. Oh, as I like to describe that somewhat metaphorically, the waves of breathing, tactile waves that rush through the body as we breathe in and as we breathe out. That's what we direct our attention to, and that's what we stay with as we continue breathing naturally and training our attention with mindfulness and with introspective awareness that notices distractions and brings us back to this object. So we're going to observe these tactile waves for a couple of minutes, training our attentional skills and being gentle with ourselves. And then we once again notice the overall state of our body, just to see how it feels right now. We notice the overall state of our mind, checking if it feels dull or energized, joyful or somewhat sad. And then with this clear awareness of our current physical and mental state, we dedicate the energy of this practice to the same aspirations with which we began. And then, once again, with a lot of care and gentleness with ourselves, we reintroduce some movement to the body, moving our hands and fingers, our toes and feet, perhaps rocking back and forth a little bit, stretching if that feels right in the moment. And then we slowly conclude. We conclude the meditation and we transition to our shared online space. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this practice. And of course, thank you for joining me in this session and for showing up to, I think, what is an exciting exploration of something quite simple, what could be more simple and more natural to all of us than kindness, we would think. But also something that is quite profound and something that actually, when we start looking at it as a practice, requires a lot of discussion because there are so many fine points, so many points that we could use to fine-tune our practice of cultivating loving kindness on the cushion, and so many fine points to look at when we're actually practicing loving kindness and the other immeasurables in daily life. So as we explore these points, our meditation practice becomes more powerful, more balanced, more inspired, more transformative. And then, of course, and that's the whole point, our behavior changes and we're able to show up for everyone living in this world in new, kinder, wiser, more compassionate, more joyful, more equanimous ways. And wouldn't that be great for all of us to affect all the threads of interdependence that run through us in a positive way? And as one colleague of mine describes it, for all of us to be able to pump more compassion, pump more loving kindness into the system of interdependence that is this world. So that would be a pretty incredible thing to accomplish. And yet it starts with something absolutely simple. These simple practices, like truly being kind with ourselves when we relax our body, speech, and mind, when we let them settle in their natural state, the state that is the union of stillness, silence, and spaciousness, or relaxation, stability, and clarity. So already by doing this preliminary meditation, we have accomplished that. That's pretty good. And I would actually also like to comment on something that was sent to me privately just now, because it's a very valuable observation. Thank you very much for this wonderful suggestion. That's with regards to what I described about nocturnal practice. I suffer from terrible nightmares, and I think that nocturnal Brahma-vihara practice would be very healing and wholesome. Well, actually, that's one of the traditional benefits that are described when benefits of loving kindness and so forth are listed formally in the Buddhist tradition. The ability of the four immeasurables to transform our practice, to transform our dreaming process, and also the process of falling asleep, and also the process of waking up. And we will have a more elaborate discussion of that when we reach the additional 11th class in this course, which would be more about the Buddhist view of the four immeasurables, the Buddhist view of the four immeasurables, where we will spend a little bit of time talking about how the four immeasurables practice can be connected to dream yoga, which of course is something that Dr. Alan Wallace teaches quite often and very elaborately and describes at length in his books. Practice of dream yoga, the practice of sleeping yoga is two interrelated practices. Four immeasurables can positively affect both of those. So we'll have a little bit of discussion there, but beyond that, simply saying, hey, four immeasurables can truly change the landscape of our dreams and what we experience from our side, the type of awareness that we bring to our dreams. That's true. However, another thing is that nocturnal practice or nighttime practice of the four immeasurables would also affect our daytime experiences in this waking life, as we describe it, just because we take that opportunity where we're surrounded by stillness, silence, spaciousness in the outside world. We take that opportunity to supercharge ourselves with these positive aspirations, and also with wisdom, which is an integral part of this practice as well. And then with that, we come back to the shared reality. So before we go into the materials for today, let's once again revisit the two questions that I would like to bring for your consideration and for sharing. So you might want to share something in the chat with regards to how your practice went and how your practice worked, and whether it happened at all over these 7 days. It's always valuable regardless of what we say, whether it was truly beneficial, whether we found it difficult to practice, we found some resistance, we experienced some joy. Truly, whatever it is, we're all humans here from a certain point of view, and from another point of view, we're all Buddhists. So depending on which viewpoint we choose, both could be valid, of course, but in this case, just sharing our humble attempts at practicing. And I can certainly say my practice is very humble. It's merely an attempt, merely an approximation of genuine four immeasurables and wisdom and so forth. But sharing this good-natured attempting that we do would perhaps be encouraging for us all as a community, for other practitioners. So let's do some of that, sharing things that might have been joyful or difficult with regards to specifically what we discussed in the meditation that was sort of our homework, especially working with attention. And that's where the second question comes in. How would you like to improve your attentional skills now that we've spent a week observing hyperactivity of attention, deficit of attention, attentional dysfunction? We talked about these a little bit, and of course, they were also described in the second and third chapters of our root text for this course, the Four Immeasurables book by Dr. Wallace. So anything that you might have noticed in the domain of attentional balance, please feel free to share. It would be truly interesting to observe. Well, there's a question here about family dynamics. And I would like to be very respectful of it, in that I'm not a trained family counselor. So I can offer advice in the spirit of, we can practice empathy, we can practice compassionate listening, we can learn systems like nonviolent communication or Kingian nonviolence. We can discuss and consider different books about family dynamics and so forth. And that's sort of like the secular amateur level that's available to me. Of course, we can also, and that's very important bit of advice as well in a way, but also quite obvious. We can, in our interactions with family members, apply the qualities of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and so forth, and try to see what needs exist for the other side. Why are they acting that way? What needs do they have? What are they responding by perhaps not being cooperative, and so forth? However, beyond that, there is a reason for why family counseling and family therapy, and there are multiple modalities of family therapy. There is a reason for why that in many countries is a licensed profession, a profession that requires licensing. So I want to be very respectful of that and not offer some universal advice that would work for everyone in a similar situation, because it is very individual, and in some cases we need to look deeply into it. So there's the basic side of practicing empathy, patience, communicating our needs, learning nonviolent communication deliberately, learning what the needs of the other person are, and so forth. But then beyond that, more intricate work in some cases requires professional intervention or professional counseling, or at least advice, maybe general advice, not one-on-one sessions, but general advice that's offered by a professional who really understands all the intricacies of family dynamics. So I just want to be respectful of that. So that's as much as I can offer on this. Then a few days ago, I realized that I was beginning to have an anxiety attack while I was taking a nap. I wasn't sure about what to do at first because I just wanted it to stop. Then I thought about doing loving kindness towards myself, but I couldn't get past my thinking mind and actually ended up having large anxiety attack. It seems as if I could have gotten up and actually meditated when I first noticed this was beginning. Is that correct? Well, maybe. If that's not something from my side where I'm able to say, oh, yes, definitely you could, or definitely you couldn't, because in a way it's hypothetical now. It's what in colloquial American English is sometimes described as coulda, woulda, shoulda, as in maybe, but the point is, or perhaps the bigger point there is, what would we like to do next time something like that happens, if it does? And it might not, but if something like that starts happening, well, just holding the arising impulse and awareness is a good beginning. Then with that, yes, perhaps using loving kindness practice, if we have some confidence in it, that would be a wonderful approach. And loving kindness does have an ability to affect anxiety in positive ways, as in to soothe anxiety. However, of course, a lot depends on what kind of anxiety that was, because it arose while taking a nap. So it might not have been the type of anxiety that comes, for example, from compulsive thinking about a specific situation that is very emotionally charged for us. And then our rumination starts spinning out of control and we get anxious. That's a daytime scenario, a scenario that arises when we're fully awake. Maybe if we were taking a nap, that anxiety arose from something like a dream, or even a dream that we can't clearly remember. We don't remember the dream and the contents of the dream, but we still carry over some emotional aftertaste. And that's where anxiety starts arising, and then it starts growing in our body. And that's the whole experience. Okay, in a situation like that, we could use loving kindness, but an even better solution from my point of view, and that's just from my experience, it might be very different for each one of us. From my point of view, a good solution would have been to do some loving kindness that involves an element of tactile contact with ourselves. And we will experiment with compassion practices of this nature. But in general, that just means, for example, putting one hand on our chest or our belly, just in a loving touch, as if we were another person, essentially a loving friend, offering their support very respectfully, with respect for our boundaries and consent and everything, but very respectfully just conveying that tenderness through touch. So for me, what I've noticed is that when I have anxiety arising in my body, practices where I do put one hand on my chest or both hands on my chest in the way that I'm showing now, and then I surround myself with tender awareness, and I send loving kindness to myself, or I send compassion to myself, and I do some mindful breathing or tender breathing when I'm using the breath to soothe my body and mind, truly trusting the tactile waves, the waves of breathing, to relax me. That helps me more in those situations than if I were to simply offer loving kindness without that tactile element and without putting some emphasis on this soothing activity. So that's my personal experience. It's not universal. It might not be universal. It's in a way anecdotal evidence about how I use these practices to work with embodied anxiety, but it might be different for others. And this is where there's the creative challenge of experimenting with them and seeing, hey, what would work the next time? And slowly, we discover that this practice works better for our anxiety. That practice works better for our anxiety. We learn these patterns, and of course, at the same time, we're expanding our medicinal kit of practices, and also we're retraining our mind and our body, as in, we can describe it in different ways. Neuroscientists would say we're retraining our neural system, our brain, and so forth. And perhaps a practitioner of Tibetan medicine would say we are purifying and rewiring our energy channels. But a simple way to express it is to say we're training our body and mind, we're soothing our body and mind, and then over time with practice, as we establish a deeper foundation of relaxation, stability, and clarity, relaxation, stillness, and vigilance, some of these episodes would be arising less often, or at least would be more manageable. Okay, I have had a certain obstacle recently when practicing loving kindness. Well, mind you, we have not begun practicing loving kindness in this course yet, so it's on you, but I'm kidding, of course. Sometimes when practicing loving kindness or visualizing a being becoming very happy or blessed, the imagination, visualization, intention, etc. gets very vast. Example, the being you're focused on becomes surrounded by billions of monies. While this is beautiful, it also makes me a bit overwhelmed because I feel there is a lot of energy being created. Can you speak to how to skillfully relate to this mental and physical energy when it becomes very large and vast, almost on its own? Yeah, but this is where I would probably prefer for us to first go through an orderly discussion of loving kindness as I will be presenting it in this course, and then to see whether that approach helps you fine-tune this element of practice. In general, I would just like to use this opportunity, and we will come back to this later today, but to still offer something in brief. In general, it's good to remember that, first of all, the essence of loving kindness is not allowing our imagination to play wildly. The essence of loving kindness is just to wish someone to be happy and have the causes of happiness. So in many cases, that doesn't at all require having very vast visions of what happiness might entail. Actually, in some cases, it's more helpful to realize that what we're wishing for this person and is not the projections from our side, what we think is right for them. It's what's right for them from their point of view. And yes, we can then make the admission that maybe not from the point of view of their deluded ego, to put it in very secular terms, but from the point of view of their deepest nature, that is wisdom and love in union, from the point of view of their basic goodness, what would be best. But still, it's not from the point of view of Lobsang Tenpa and Lobsang Tenpa's fantasies about what they need to be surrounded with and so forth. So that humbling reminder of, hey, it's not about, yes, it is nice sometimes to let our imagination play a little bit, especially when we go from simply loving kindness practice to the practice of generosity as an expression of loving kindness, for example. Perfectly fine then. But in general, in basic form loving kindness, we limit ourselves to the vastest and yet simplest aspiration of may you be happy. And we don't always need to add these fine details, because if we do, we might fall into the trap of being the great director who envisions what needs to happen to each and every being. And that's not the essence of this practice. And also that might make us feel a bit puffed up, which is not what loving kindness needs to bring about. So sometimes it's actually about allowing our imagination to relax a little bit, to find greater ease, to be less energetically active, and for us to still maintain the clear-cut, the laser-like intention of may you be happy, or in the Tibetan tradition, may you be happy and have the causes of happiness. So like everything else, like any other concentration practice, and loving kindness is a concentration practice, we're constantly working with this dial of more intensity, less intensity. Part of it is navigating the fine balance between, finding the fine balance between excitement or agitation or excitation and laxity, dullness, sluggishness, sleepiness, torpor. Part of that is that. But similarly, for this play of imagination, yes, there needs to be some visionary aspect of it in that, okay, happiness is possible, but it doesn't need to become what Khandro Rinpoche calls mental Disneyland, where it's a bunch of fantasies, quite often colored with the aesthetics of a tradition we feel close to. So if we've been a Tibetan practitioner for a while, we start imagining all these beautiful Tibetan thingies happening to people or falling all over people. And before we know it, we start imagining this Orton country being showered with a rain of beautiful images of Guru Rinpoche and so forth. And it's all nice, it's meaningful, it is aspirational, but we need to keep that balanced and say, hey, I don't want to fall into the extreme of letting my imagination play too much in this case, because that's not the meaning of this practice. The meaning of this practice is the intention, not the acts of imagination. The acts of imagination are simply there to support the intention itself. Due to my next observation, due to my continuing lack of adequate attentional skills, my formal practice this past week has been very spotty, alas. However, I have been diligent in bringing metta phrases to every moment of the day when I remember. That's beautiful. That's a good beginning. That being said, I would definitely still suggest that we all do spend some time just noticing how our attention skills work and trying to discern those elements of attentional hyperactivity, attentional deficit, and so forth, even before we jump into metta phrases. Why? Because actually there is a good, there's wonderful logic in first exploring the idea behind and beyond samadhi as this whole bandwidth of practices. And then with that, going specifically into loving kindness as a one type of samadhi practice. Otherwise, there might be a little bit, we just might not fully understand what's happening with our attentional energy. And when we do have an honest understanding of what happens to it, beyond simply saying, oh yes, we could use more of it, we could use more mental stability. Well, yeah, that's an obvious statement. But beyond that, seeing how it works in our case is actually very, very helpful. And in some traditions, including the very profound Indo-Tibetan tradition of the great seal practice or Mahamudra practice, one of the most profound systems in Tibetan Buddhism. It's actually very experiential in that we would be invited in some cases to do practices that might seem very menial, like checking on our attention, saying, hey, am I distracted? Am I excited, overexcited? Am I in attentional deficit? We would actually get tasks like that before we are taught any advanced methods. And it is with good reason, because we think, oh, if only I got these advanced instructions, the so-called pointing out instructions, or someone told me do this and this and that, and then you're resting in the highest nature of your mind, all of that would be cool. But that's not at all how it's taught, actually. It's taught by giving us very, very simple tasks for a period of time and saying, hey, during this week, try to observe what's happening with your mind with regards to this. Try observe what's happening in this part of your body, whether it's getting tense or not. Try looking for your mind. Where does your mind exist? By truly looking at a physical object and asking yourself. That's actually one real, very real practice. Asking yourself, is my mind in this cup? Is my mind in this phone? Is my mind under this stone? Is it hidden in this tree? And as silly as it might sound, these practices exist for a reason. So here, first we check what's happening with my attentional energy. And then once we've established some understanding of it, we learn to shape our awareness, which was our whole discussion last time. We learn to modulate our awareness to turn it into loving kindness. And phrases, metta phrases, loving kindness phrases, is just one of the multiple ways of doing that. We will learn others as well. My attention skills are mainly affected by anxiety, compulsive thoughts that greatly affect my meditative practices. And this is getting worse compared to my practice when I started about 15 years ago. I appreciate your advice. Well, in the Tibetan tradition, it's always said, first of all, when we truly start looking at the mind, it might seem like it's getting worse. And then in some cases, people even say, hey, meditation teacher, you made my mind worse because my mind was less distracted and less prone to compulsive thinking before. Now it's getting worse. So usually it's not that. It's just we're bringing greater awareness to the messy field that is our mind. There's that aspect. That being said, it is absolutely possible that due to external circumstances, such as more dramas in our life, more dramas in the political arena, more problems with one pandemic sort of maybe ending and turning into something endemic, and then there's now a new pandemic, and so just all of that, everything else in the outer world, and the family situation, work situation, it is possible that under the influence of that, more compulsive thoughts are being catalyzed because we're not yet Buddhas, perhaps. Sure, absolutely a normal situation. So what do we do in that situation? Well, no one solution, however, multiple solutions available, multiple options. And the essence of them, the number one question to ask ourselves is to see which of these practices help me ground myself with care and affection for my body and mind. What would help me amongst maybe the billions of methods that I've already heard about, all of these meditations of different levels and different modalities and so forth? Which ones would help me ground myself and project affection and tenderness to these body and mind? Because when I ground myself and when I learn, when I choose these maybe very simple practices, like meditating on one's breath for 10 cycles, but doing that throughout the day again and again and again and again and again. And that's one good solution. Or doing the practice of settling body, speech, and mind for 3 minutes, but doing those 3 minutes again and again throughout the day. When we choose something simple like that, and then we start applying it, and we apply it repeatedly, and we don't expect, oh, like I'm going to do hours of this practice, and then in 3 years, I'm going to get enlightened. We put all of that into the back burner for now, and we think, hey, what would help me ground myself now? And we do that. We use the suggested solution that we've chosen on the basis of options available to us. And it could also be loving kindness practice. Or it can also, for some people, they prefer mantra-related practices or practices of prayer and so forth, because that's what grounds them. We're all very different. The Buddha very clearly stated that. And then beyond that, authors of great meditation manuals said that depending on our propensities, very different methods might work for us. Some people are very faith-oriented. Some people are very skeptical. Some people are naturally angry, and so forth. So many variations in our constitution and our mental um, unique propensities. But beyond that, choosing something and then reminding ourselves that the more I'm able to return to a state of ease, the less neurotic I'm going to be with others. And OMG, are they going to be grateful? Because, oh my God, do I make their lives worse when my system is out of balance and does transform into, once again, what Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche calls pain body, pain speech, and pain mind. So if I'm able to notice, hey, I'm in this pain speech mode, pain body mode, pain mind mode, and just I'm buzzing with neurotic energy. When we're able to notice that, and then instead of projecting it every which way, we're able to maybe do 10 cycles of mindful breathing, maybe bring our attention to the feet and just rest there with the sensations in our feet, or maybe do 3 minutes of settling body, speech, and mind, or what Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche calls the 3 peels, white peel, red peel, blue peel, of stillness, silence, and spaciousness. Maybe that. Or maybe for some of us, indeed, mentally focusing on a mantra. That's a practice that calms some people down for sure. So whatever it is that works for us, returning to that one key thing that helps us calm down. And it actually won't probably work straight away. We'll need to repeat it throughout the day 50 times, that little method of counting 10 breaths, but truly counting it in the spirit of joy and training. I'm rewiring the body, speech, and mind. But then once we're able to accomplish that, then there is a probability that some of the compulsive thinking, along with the buzzing emotional energy and mood energy, some of that would slowly begin to calm down. And that in itself is a practice of loving kindness, not the loving kindness that we generate on the cushion, where may I be happy and so forth. That's also important. And that could be our solution. Not just that, it's practical application of loving kindness for ourselves and others. It's loving kindness for me because the more I'm able to soothe myself, of course, the less I suffer, obviously. But it's also loving kindness for others because if I'm not buzzing with that harmful energy of being emotionally unsettled, they receive less harm and they have to do less emotional labor by tending to my emotions. So, but we do need to take the responsibility for creatively finding one of these practices. And I've given some suggestions that are not coming from my side. I didn't invent them at all. These are just some practices that are commonly recommended in my experience. But which one works for us would depend on our propensities. And it's an exciting creative search. It's not a YouTube. I mean, it is anxious inducing for some people looking at the menu and having to choose amongst 6 or 10 positions available on the menu. But also it's exciting. You have the freedom to choose amongst these, and whatever you choose, you work with it, and then slowly you rewire. That's a wonderful term. This actually comes from a lot of neuroscience, or has been hijacked in some ways by neuroscience, but still applicable in our situation. We rewire our body, speech, and mind. And then as some of these knots start to undo themselves, with that, every other practice will also work better. I went into the forest to practice. That's the next observation. And after walking for some time and then settling onto a smooth rock, I was able to settle focus much more effectively than in my rooms at home. Absolutely. That's a wonderful experience. And that's something that I find very inspiring as an instructor or facilitator who is migrating more and more towards teaching Ekodharma related courses, because there is a beautiful, there is an incredible power that connecting with natural elements can bring to any sort of contemplative practice that we do. And that, of course, also includes our ability to settle more deeply. But vice versa, it's not just that the natural environment can make our practice of settling deeper. It also works the other way around. One way to harvest the energy of natural elements, or to allow natural elements to rebalance our psyche, and that is certainly a thing which is not only explored from the Buddhist side and from the side of other traditions, including indigenous traditions in this world. No, it's also something that is being explored by psychology, and specifically by the wonderful field of ecopsychology. There's also, what are these fields talking about? Elements have an ability to balance our mind and also balance our body to a certain degree and how it feels. And within that, this is where we can simply enter a natural environment that feels right in this specific moment. And it would be a different environment in each specific situation because our energy states and our emotional states are different. But we can enter it, and then without doing more elaborate practices, and those certainly exist, very practices for very intentionally and consciously absorbing the qualities of the elements, like comfort, the quality of comfort that is associated with water, or stability from the earth, and so forth. Without doing any of that, we could just settle our body, speech, and mind right there with a certain level of openness, just accessing stillness, silence, and spaciousness in any sort of natural environment. In a way, even imaginary or even projected on a screen, that also works to a certain degree, but of course, especially an actual environment, especially if you're blessed to live next to things like the redwood trees, or I don't know, the majestic trees of your specific region, or the sea, or a beautiful river, and so forth. But truly any manifestation of the natural world, just settling there and allowing it to feel us with its healing power. Not some kind of magical energy or anything like that, but just the balancing effect of being with something that is natural and has existed way before humanity came into being. So that is also a wonderful practice. And what you did is a natural combination of both. So that's wonderful. I'm still trying different times to meditate to find the best time to sit. I appear to be prone to laxity recently, and my goal this past week was to find what time of day worked best for me. It seems that early morning is the best time as I remain alert and more stable in my meditation. I spent time to rearrange my sadhana space, and I feel more comfortable now. So I'm feeling positive with my practice overall. Having said that, my sadhana has really challenged at the end of the week, given what has occurred here in the US around women's reproductive rights. I challenged to face, and I'm struggling to remain focused. Not at all unusual, not at all uncommon, not at all strange, because I actually was attending, in addition to teaching classes this weekend, I also attended a little bit of a course taught by someone, and as a participant, just as a participant. And I think in all these spaces that I've been, in all the Dharma-related spaces that I've been in this week, even if they were somewhat geographically remote from the United States, there's still a reverberation, an after sound of a major event like that. And we don't need to deny it, and we don't need to suppress our reaction, our response to it. Instead, what we do is we sit with a response, we allow ourselves to notice, hey, I'm not okay with this, or I'm bothered by this, or I'm worried about this, or I'm experiencing rage about this. So we're noticing what's happening with us. We're noticing that our response is vibrant energy in the space of our mind. And then we ask ourselves, and that's one of multiple strategies, eventually, when we have given some time, we have given some space to our sadness and so forth, our whatever our response is, our natural instinctive response, we eventually notice, hey, my response energy is energy. As like, it's something happening in my mind. It's my mind not being uncaring. It's my mind not being indifferent. And so with this energy of caring, of non-indifference, of being concerned, of not being apathetic, I will reinstate my aspirations for the common good in this world. I will remind myself that I am committed to contributing to peace and freedom and joy and people's ability to live and let live, love and let love, and so forth, all of those values that exist for us. So we remind ourselves of what's meaningful for us, and we recommit to doing the work, the level of work that's available to us individually. It's very different. We are all in different positions in the interdependent network of things, but reminding ourselves, hey, yes, I care, and I will do my best to continue working with this weave, the weave of reality. And I can affect it in so many ways. So not to give up, to never give up, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, and to within that to say, hey, my energy, the energy of my response, I will eventually channel it into something that's meaningful. And it goes for any major situation like that, because of course, living on this planet, we're going to keep getting news of similar nature every day. It just, we do our best to process and then to remind ourselves of our highest aspirations. And those combine wisdom and compassion, and then we enact those aspirations in what we actually do in real life. So that's absolutely fine. There's a question asking about just probably the spelling, Mahamudra. Yes, that's the correct spelling, but we will mention Mahamudra in the 11th session of this course, because loving kindness and so forth, they connect to that system of practice, and they also connect to other styles, advanced styles of practice, such as Buddhist tantric practice, Dzogchen practice, dream yoga practice, emptiness practice, and so forth. So in the last class in this course, we're going to see the connection between these basic methods of, hey, I wish for everyone to be happy and have the cause of happiness, between that and these advanced practices for seeing into the deepest nature of reality. And the last observation here, for now at least, my mindfulness of the breath is improving slowly, year by year, but I worry that I can be holding the breath too tightly. This then becomes a sort of clenching. And then I find this excludes wide attention or peripheral awareness. Suddenly I'm thinking about something else. It sort of snaps away. Any thoughts on balance in mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is the balancing force in itself. That is how it is presented in some aspects of Buddhist teaching. I'm not going to list all the points and classifications, because that's going to be a bit weird for those who are not actively thinking about those lists of things. And mind you, Buddhists do love their lists and their definitions. But suffice it to say that in the Buddhist tradition, there are sometimes all these lists of stuff, all these wonderful qualities that we have to develop to become fully enlightened, or all these ethical values that we have to practice, and so forth, a bunch of stuff, or things that we need to eliminate in our behavior. It's like Buddha is a very, very diligent coach who made all these coaching checklists for his clients, and he made a lot of them. And then masters of later generations made even more, so that it actually becomes easier to transmit and to sustain by memorizing these things and transmitting them. So in one of those lists, mindfulness keeps recurring again and again and again as the power that helps us balance this wonderful quality and that wonderful quality. Then in the next subsection, this wonderful quality and this wonderful quality. And mindfulness keeps recurring as the balancing factor between those. So how do we apply that idea here? Well, mindfulness is, as we remember, bearing in mind, but mindfulness is sort of married to another very important mental function called introspective awareness, or vigilance, or introspection. Dr. Wallace prefers the translation of introspection. And it's not introspection as in sitting down and thinking, what am I? What are my habits? How am I as a person? Not that introspection as a very elaborate reflection about who we are and so forth. No, it's moment by moment, or repeatedly checking on the state of our body and mind on occasion, as we have discussed it last time. Just checking, hey, am I distracted or not? Am I too tight? Am I too loose in terms of my concentration? Or is my body getting tense, or is it still relaxed? Just that. So mindfulness and introspective awareness together, these two together, are the solution to what you're describing, as in sometimes this second part, introspective awareness checks, hey, am I still controlling the breath? Is there still a little bit of tightness there? And very simply, if we do notice that there is a bit of tightness that we're still noticing, we don't need to worry about it too much, so not to reify it and imagine it as more of a problem than it is. Instead, relax more deeply with the exhalation. That's literally the advice that I've heard repeated again and again and again when people voice this point from meditation masters. That's the advice they're giving. Just notice it and try relaxing, work on relaxing more deeply with the exhalation, and just observe what happens. Don't have an expectation, oh, if I do that with the exhalation and then again with the exhalation and again with the exhalation, eventually all control will cease. No, over time, and yes, it is indeed sometimes years, if not decades, over time, we become less controlling of the breath. So not to expect immediate results, but just to remind ourselves what I can do is to continue relaxing with the out breath. And also maybe do some practice in the supine position where it's easier to establish greater level of relaxation. And also in life in general, checking where we can become more easygoing. That would also affect our meditation, and vice versa. Being able to relax, release some of the control over breath, over breathing, would lead to us being able to sometimes be more easygoing about the things that are happening in our life. And this is where last time, I think I mentioned this wonderful analogy from Mingyur Rinpoche, where he says, with the mala, if you hold it like this, well, you're going to get tired pretty fast because there's a lot of muscular energy that goes into that. But holding it like this would be easier. Of course, eventually your hand would also get tired, but this is an easier gesture than that. Light touch takes less energy than tension and control. So with that understanding, we slowly release. And we do that again and again. And once we've done that 5 billion times, if needed, it will dissipate. The tendency to control or to control too much will dissipate, which wouldn't mean losing the quality of attention that we have cultivated with so much effort, or that we have uncovered by releasing so much effort. Either way. Can you clarify if shamatha is the same as samadhi? Well, I think last time we had a little bit of information about that on one of the slides, and I'm just going to come back to that and mention that shamatha is a specific level or advanced level of samadhi. So you have this on your slides. The slides you can download from the Dropbox folder, which we include every time. And yes, we have replaced the link, but with a new link, you'll be able to download the slides, and you'll also get the kitty picture for free on the same slide. But shamatha is either an specific advanced level of samadhi, that is mental gathering, or it is generally a name that we use for practices that lead to both shamatha as a specific state and samadhi in general, mental gatheredness, the gathering of mental energy. So so depending on the context, you can also either hear about shamatha, the specific attainment, and that's a specific level of samadhi, specific level of concentration. Or you could hear about shamatha practices, and that is any practice that helps us train our attention skills. Some people use those practices just a tiny bit to just get a little bit more mental balance. And some people go into long-term retreats and they've cultivated incredible levels of attention. And that's sort of the same practice. It was just used to a different degree. So I hope that clarifies things. And of course, the second and third chapters in Dr. Wallace's book are in a way reference materials, as in the idea behind those chapters is not that you're going to read them once and then suddenly you know everything there is to know about shamatha and samadhi and these practices and so forth. No, I mean, in a way you do, because these are succinct explanations of all the major points with regards to mental stability and so forth. But we also have those chapters on hand now. So we can always go to them when we face a specific obstacle where we want some reminders about the 9 stages of attentional development and so forth. And we can also read more elaborate sources on that when we feel the wish to explore that. And we can also listen to recordings of Dr. Wallace's retreats on shamatha, which are always wonderfully elaborate and clear and expansive and so forth, or attend shamatha retreats with other qualified instructors. And just in general, all of this material together would help us integrate that system of knowledge, system of information. So that's something that would take us years, and that's wonderful. It's not bad news. Oh, it would take us years to integrate all of that information into our mind, into how we use language, into how we use all these terms and so forth. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Even a teeny tiny bit of integrating that into our mind is already means that we're learning so much more about attention, how it affects our life, how it can bring about inner well-being, eudaimonic well-being, and so forth. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. And now we're moving on to the next topic, which is for immeasurables proper. Why we spent all this time, the first 3 sessions, on everything else was not just because the first 3 chapters in the book are not about for immeasurables per se. They're about ethical training and training in samadhi and the overall context for the for immeasurables. It's not just that. It is one reason for why we're doing it this way, but it's not the only reason. The other reason is that it's actually, in my experience, very helpful to first learn about awareness as this foundational function of our mind, and then see the training in for immeasurables as learning to modulate our awareness into these beautiful forms. So I like to use this example, and I think it's, I mean, maybe it's a bit cheesy, but I still like it. The example with our voice. Let's imagine you've discovered that you have a beautiful singing voice. Naturally, you're gifted. Your vocal cords are truly wonderful. So you discover, oh, I have this voice. I can do stuff with it. And when I do stuff with it, people like it. So in the same way, we're discovering when we learn about what awareness is, that we have this incredible tool at our disposal. And that tool actually is a foundational function of our consciousness. We always will have awareness. Not in every lifetime will we have wonderful vocal cords. I mean, some of us can sing and some can't, or some of us could but can no longer, and there's all that happening. However, awareness we will always have, and according to the Buddhist description of the world, we have it now, we always had it, and we will always have it. So even when the physical universe goes back into singularity and then another universe arises, our awareness is never going anywhere. So that's the good news. And even better news is that we think it just automatically collapses into these specific functions of anger, depression, anxiety, panic attack, all of that. And we have very little control over what it collapses into, what it projects into, what it crystallizes as. And in a way, that's true. Initially, we have very little control. That's when we are sort of beginners, not with regards to Buddhism or anything like that, but just in general in terms of emotional hygiene, mental hygiene, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls it. However, the essence of mental hygiene is learning that we can use our awareness and deliberately shape it into good stuff. So just like with our voice, when it's properly trained, we can perform incredible pieces that would make people, give people hope, give them joy, rile them to action, and so forth. A trained singer can do incredible things to people's hearts and minds. In a similar manner, with our awareness, when we shape it into these forms of loving kindness and compassion and so forth, and of course, wisdom and so on, we can do incredible things in this world. First of all, for ourselves, because all these states entail a certain level of happiness in them, but also for others. Truly projecting loving kindness to another being and then expressing it through our words and actions as well. That is an incredible gift, which would be very supportive for people. And of course, if in addition to that, we actually do have wonderful vocal cords and an ability to sing, we can combine our verbal energy with the energy of our voice with the mental energy of our loving kindness, and we can truly be an incredible, once again, agent of love and compassion in this world through our singing. Or with our body, maybe we're an incredible chef, so we use our ability to make focaccia to support people's well-being. And what we bring from the mental side is this awareness shaped into loving kindness or one of the other immeasurables. So the Sanskrit name for immeasurables is apramana. Is the negative prefix, and in the same way that I guess here is the negative prefix in English, and apamanya in Pali. These generic terms that means that something is boundless. So actually, we would find translations like for boundless states, for immeasurable states, for states without boundary, and so forth. But basically, it's the same idea in all of these variations. So four measurable is probably the one that I encounter the most. And please bear with me when I use this term instead of the term Brahma Vihara, which would appear somewhat more familiar to some people, because a little bit later, we would actually see that Brahma Vihara, this divine abode, is a term that is understood quite differently in the Pali tradition of teaching these practices and in the Sanskrit tradition. Because many people hear about loving kindness, especially loving kindness through the Pali tradition, and in some cases even through the insight meditation movement in America, through teachers like Sharon Salzberg and so forth, or colleagues, our esteemed colleagues, there is common use of the Pali names for things, metta, Brahma Vihara, and so forth. Nothing wrong with that at all. However, because in this case, we're also strongly relying on the Tibetan lineage and the Sanskrit tradition, therefore, at some point later on, I will briefly explain the difference between how the word Brahma Vihara is used in the Pali and the Sanskrit traditions. And because it's different, I'm not commonly using it again and again in these classes. Instead, I'm using the word immeasurables because that's actually how we would see these states mentioned in most liturgies in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. When one begins their practice, one takes refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, generates a vast motivation of bodhicitta, and then there's usually this formula of the four immeasurable states that we're supposed to generate in fast sequence before progressing into any other practice that we do. That's how these states are commonly encountered by most people in the Tibetan tradition. But beyond that actually lies an incredible depth and profundity and vastness of teachings about how to properly cultivate each one of them. And that's the source that we're going to be relying on. But why are they called immeasurables? In addition to the basic fact, as it says here, that they're associated with benevolence and are used to establish both attentional balance and support wholesome behavior, that is, kind behavior, generous behavior, compassionate behavior, pro-social behavior. Why are they called immeasurable? There are actually several different interpretations of that we would find in traditional teachings. The most common and obvious one is that they become immeasurable when they boundlessly encompass all beings. So right now, for us, they're really not immeasurable. They are aspirationally immeasurable in that eventually we would like to have boundless loving kindness. Right now, we can say that we don't have boundless loving kindness. We have some loving kindness, but we don't have truly boundless loving kindness. Or another way of describing the same thing, equally valid, we could say that we do have boundless loving kindness, but the boundless part of it is still hidden under a bunch of stuff. So when we remove that obstructing stuff, then the boundless aspect that's already there will become manifest. Right now, it's hidden. So until we either cultivate the boundless aspect or we uncover it, it's not truly boundless in terms of how it practically appears, because we are quite choosy in how we become and how we manifest our kindness to beings. And we actually quite choosy in terms of how we feel kindness towards beings, so how we experience these states and so forth, compassion and everything else. So right now, they're not truly measurable for us, but that's what we're trying to go. We are trying to make them boundless. And from that point of view, they are aspirationally called practicing the four immeasurables. So would it be fine to say we are practicing the four immeasurables in this course, even though they're not yet immeasurable in our mind? Yeah, absolutely fine. In the same way that it's fine to say we're practicing shamatha, even though we haven't realized shamatha yet. We're just moving towards it. So that's a common way for describing things in the Tibetan tradition. Practicing shamatha means going towards that goal. Practicing four immeasurables, going towards making them measurable. Right now, they're not yet immeasurable, but they can be eventually. And even that is a big working hypothesis for many people, because some people, and that might be you, and there's no shame in that at all, some people, when they hear, we can become loving and kind towards each and every being in the universe with the same level of intensity. We can become compassionate. We can experience compassion towards every being on the planet, not on the planet, in the universe, in the multiverse, or beyond that, in the omniverse. These are all, nesting dolls of different verses. In the omniverse, every being, we can experience compassion towards them with equal intensity. Oof. Not easy to trust that if we're noticing how limited our mind is right now, and at times when we are becoming very angry towards some people, very judgmental towards some people, truly excluding them from the circle of our kindness, and not truly knowing how to not do that, how to be very clear about boundaries with regards to behavior, and still have kindness and compassion for these evildoers, as we mentally label them. That's not an easy thing. That's actually what we explore in these practices, how to feel love and compassion for each being while being bringing laser-like clarity to our ethical discernment with regards to actions that are harming, that are harmful. Absolutely possible to combine those two things equally, but that requires a lot of training, which is why truly making these states measurable is a large task. Beyond that, there are other interpretations of why they're called immeasurable, and in some cases we would see it explained that they only become truly immeasurable when they are combined with very profound states of concentration. So not just directing them towards all beings, but also going into a very deep type of samadhi. That's another explanation. Yet another explanation means that they truly become immeasurable when they're combined with very profound levels of wisdom, so that it's no longer simply conceptually saying, yes, may all beings be free of suffering, or maybe all be happy, but it's also truly wisely knowing how beings exist. What's their true nature? What's the true nature of reality? So kindness is fused then with wisdom. That's another interpretation. However, in this course, we will rely on the primary, the most common one of when it's directed towards all beings with equal intensity, then it becomes an immeasurable state. However, once again, the good news is all of these states are just forms that we can give to our awareness. They're shapes of awareness, modulations of awareness, specific colors in the light that is awareness, specific shades of that light. And when we train, we learn to modulate the light of our awareness into these four wonderful rays that eventually can become all-encompassing, all-illuminating. So when they are all illuminating and that they illuminate every being, including ourselves, that's when they become immeasurable. And that's the aspiration there. And the first of these immeasurables that we're going to be exploring here will be loving kindness, because we're going to rely on this quite common rubric of cultivating them by beginning with loving kindness, then going into compassion, then going towards empathetic joy, and then going towards equanimity. That is how most prayers of the four immeasurables go in the Tibetan tradition. However, we would also sometimes see another sequence where it begins with equanimity. So we establish equal openness, equal open-hearted openness towards everyone. Then it goes into loving kindness. Then there's compassion. And finally, there's empathetic joy. Also possible. And beyond that, some Tibetan masters that we're going to quote from later on say we can actually cultivate them in any other order. We could begin with compassion. We could begin with empathetic joy. We could go to a course on compassion, first be trained in compassion, hear explanations about compassion, meditate on compassion. And then later on, we learn that there's also loving kindness. That's a companion state, and empathetic joy. And we learn about those, we meditate on them, and then we end with equanimity. Or we can go to a workshop that's all about joy. CCN has scheduled such a webinar for August. It's going to be me and my colleague Christian Howard, and we're going to explore different types of joy together, meditate on them. And maybe for some people, that would be their first introduction to these practices, right? So they first learn empathetic joy. Okay. Does that mean their system of the four immeasurables is then irrevocably broken? They can no longer work with the other ones? No, of course not. You can begin with any corner of the square that is the four immeasurables. However, it is advisable, and that's what's clearly stated in many sources on the four immeasurables, to eventually collect all the four Pokemon that we're talking about here. Loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Because only when they work as a team do they truly balance each other and keep each other in check, so that none of them spin out of control and turn into something they shouldn't really be. They don't turn into their negative counterparts or their false facsimiles, which we're going to discuss for each one to make sure we are not slipping into those. But beyond that, of course, ideally, we then combine them with so-called wisdom, which we could, for the purposes of this course, wonderfully define, as Sylvia Burstein calls it, like an exceptional level of common sense. So an exceptional level of common sense with regards to causes and conditions, nature of reality, the nature of our mind, the nature of our personhood, personality, how we exist as a person. We bring that to the four immeasurables, we combine those, we integrate them fully, and then with that, we're good to go, because these are the only things we need to get enlightened: kindness and wisdom. When we work on them, in some cases, it might appear individually, because these are slightly different in terms of how we work with them in practice. Some types of wisdom require a lot of analytical thinking, maybe less of that for the immeasurables. Some types of immeasurable practice would require a lot of imagination, maybe not the case for some types of wisdom practice. But eventually, as we approach higher stages of practice or the more profound teachings, such as what I've mentioned as Mahamudra and so forth, in those that boundary slowly starts to dissolve. But it's important to not jump into those too early in our practice. Otherwise, we would think we're actually so advanced, we don't need to do these individual meditations on loving kindness and on wisdom. And it's all just naturally arising in our mind. And maybe true for some people, absolutely true actually for some people. But for many people, it seems that way until there's a big shocking event. And then it turns out that actually the foundation was not built at all. And the roof was just resting right there on the ground. It's golden and beautiful, that roof, but there's no walls to hold it and no foundation. So that's why we're working with beginner's mind from the very foundation of saying, hey, what's awareness? What's shamatha? What's how to observe our breath? And then finally, how to do loving kindness. However, as we train in all these methods, and then that's another very important component that is sometimes missed with people when people, and I certainly have that tendency in myself, so that's what I'm commenting on. It would be for me quite natural to think, oh, well, I want to do advanced practice. I want to practice Mahamudra and Dzogchen and Buddhist Tantra and all those things, and do koan practice and see the true nature of reality and just rest in the natural state. Why? Who's to say I'm not allowed? Well, no one. I can do whatever. But from my own experience, I know that's not truly advisable. I do need to build the foundation properly, at least in my case. Once again, absolutely possible that everybody gathered here in this course is way above me in terms of being gifted with loving kindness and compassion and wisdom and so forth, and truly ready for these very advanced teachings. I'm only explaining things as if I was explaining them to a younger version of myself, essentially. That's a good way to think about it. And a younger version of myself would really benefit from going through all of this step by step, putting one building block upon another to make sure the foundation is really solid. So another thing that I would have missed were I to jump straight to the deep end of stuff. And it's not like I can't have aspirations towards it. Certainly, that's very possible. Aspirationally, I can think about more advanced practices and do them a little bit. But what I can't miss is this: the fact that I can't only practice loving kindness cognitively in terms of my mental training and completely ignore the second component of behavioral training, which means applying loving kindness in how I speak and in how I act, and also in how I think about people when difficult situations arise, instead of on my cushion. So the first level is very necessary. Sitting down, meditating, maybe generating the aspirations and the positive attitudes, training in different types of perception. So yes, modulating my awareness, that's how we described it, shaping it into the beautiful flowers of loving kindness and so forth. But beyond that, were I to completely skip the second level, well, first of all, I would give Buddhism a very, very bad name, because people would hear, oh, this person supposedly teaching courses in the four immeasurables, absolutely, well, trying not to use any bad words, but absolutely not a good person, not a nice person at all. And once again, it doesn't mean I need to turn in a nice person as in a people pleaser, not that at all. But I do need to display some generosity, some tendency for some ability to practice nonviolence, some fortitude, and so forth. So I do need to be able to listen compassionately and so forth. And yes, I also need to be able to establish clear, healthy boundaries and to respect the boundaries of others. That's very important. So unless I have some of those skills, my compassion, as Mathieu Ricard describes it, Mathieu Ricard, of course, is not only one of the biggest humanist thinkers of our time and an incredibly accomplished Buddhist translator, but also the author of one of the most important books about the four immeasurables, available in English, French, and Spanish, at least, and Portuguese, simply called Altruism. It's going to be on our suggested reading list, but not yet. I'm not jumping there yet. However, Mathieu Ricard, in his wonderful talk about this whole thing, says compassion without action is hypocritical. So we don't want that. We want our compassion to be integrated with action, to manifest in action, generosity of different kinds, nonviolence of different types, and so forth, respecting boundaries, respecting consent, being able to compassionately listen, being able to clearly discern the ethical challenges of our times and to truly have a response to them, not be apathetic towards what's going on in the world. Oh, the world is on fire, who cares? Truly being able to act with compassion. So these are both types of training that are necessary. And until now, in this course, we have been using type 2. We have been doing behavioral training. Why? How? How did that happen? Did we notice that? We practiced applied loving kindness and applied compassion for ourselves by truly taking care of our body, speech, and mind in meditation, truly letting them rest, truly letting them release all the knots of tension, truly observing the process of breathing, the tactile waves, and so forth. So that through this very simple act of using our attention constructively, we would be able to relax, rest, and be well. And that is behavioral training and compassion, because then we can also let others live and be well and relax and so forth, ease their burden. So absolutely, we've been doing that. Now we're going into the cognitive training in the first of the four immeasurables, and that is loving kindness. So once again, a little bit of Sanskrit and Pali. The Sanskrit term here is Maitri. The Pali is metta, and that is a very, very well-known word, perhaps way more well-known than the Sanskrit version of it. But both of them, in terms of their meaning, as many people present here would know, imply the meaning, the connotation of the root mitra in Sanskrit is friend. And so Maitri, one way of translating that is friendliness. And then we would also encounter such translations as benevolence, loving friendliness, loving benevolence, so all these combinations of different words, and simply also love. So you would sometimes see that some authors, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama in his books co-authored with Venerable Thupten Chodron, and we've mentioned their books co-written, or their books created in cooperation between them two as sources that we can look at for more formal Buddhist teachings on the four immeasurables. We talked about that in our first session together. So in those books, we would see loving kindness translated is simply love. But what's important is, of course, not simply the word. What's important is the meaning of that word. So even if we were saying loving kindness, but we did not agree on the definition of it, and let alone if we were saying love, but we did not discuss what will we mean by love in this course, what is meant by love in the teachings on the four immeasurables, and we would be all over the place. Because maybe some people would think just about feeling good about something, or liking something or someone, or wanting to spend one's life with them, or sending them mental flowers and projecting rays of light towards them, all kinds of things like that. It would be really all over the place, as it is with our use of word love. So we need to reclaim it by talking about the definition, and it's very simple in this case. Loving kindness, or love, maitri, metta, is a wish for a sentient being to be happy and have the causes of happiness. And this is where we return, we roll back the clip, we roll back all the way back to the first session where we did the practice of vision quest. You might remember that. We asked ourselves 4 questions. How do I envision true, genuine human flourishing? That is happiness, well-being, genuine well-being. How do I envision that at this stage in my life? And yes, that evolves, that changes, but how do I envision that? Well, some answer eventually probably arose, especially if we kept practicing with it. Then what types of support do I need to receive? How do I need to transform myself? What types of gifts do I want to bring to the world? All of these essentially are questions about these 2 points, happiness and the causes of happiness. And some people might remember the umbrella definition of happiness in Buddhism, which is very useful in secular terms as well. Happiness is any state that we want to maintain when it's present, to make it longer, to keep it going, essentially. Or we want to evoke when it's not present. And that can include things like finding some pleasure in some nice gelato, or having the bliss of full awakening present in our mind at all times because we have reached full awakening. So anything and everything in between, and also much humbler things like it's a hot day, there's a cool breeze that brings some relief from the heat. That is also a type of happiness. It's very fleeting and it's very contextual in that were that cool breeze to come on a cold day, we would feel very different about it, but still, it still matches the definition. But of course, in this case, we're thinking about more profound types of happiness in this, where the idea of eudaimonic well-being and also balanced, dignified, hedonic well-being, they're connected, they come here. So some people quite naturally ask, okay, well, since everyone has a slightly different understanding of happiness, what is the version of happiness that we're wishing for all beings, given that all beings are so different? And never mind all beings, everyone in this class right here, 26 people present here live, they would have such different ideas about what happiness entails, as in some people want to get married, some don't, some want children, some think children ruin your life, some want to be artists, some don't want to be artists, and just like some people hate music, some people love music, and so forth. It's just the variations of what we think, especially with regards to hedonic well-being. But even eudaimonically, maybe some people are trained in a theistic tradition and they really find true, profound spiritual meaning in a theistic system of practice, the mystical Christian tradition, the Sufi tradition, the mystical tradition of Judaism, the Hindu tradition, of course, and many others. This is not an exhaustive list in any way, but truly, when we talk about eudaimonic well-being and we say, well, for you, what's the deepest level of eudaimonic well-being you can imagine? Someone would say, like some of the great Christian mystics, oh, union with God, or truly seeing the nature of God, or merging with the nature of the divinity and so forth. Okay, absolutely. That answer makes perfect sense in the systems of practice that some people would be following. And of course, if we were talking to a Buddhist or to a follower of secular humanism, they would answer very different. They very differently. They would offer very different interpretations of, or very different labels for that deepest eudaimonic well-being. We don't know, says the Dalai Lama, whether the ultimate result of all these eudaimonic paths is truly the same unless we have walked all of them at the same time. And most people only have time to walk one, barely have time to walk one of these paths in one lifetime. So we shouldn't be making sweeping statements like, oh, it's all one and the same and there's certainly a lot of commonality, but we don't need to dumb it down and say it's absolutely all the same, because that actually is, as His Holiness says, not very respectful of the differences. And we need to be okay with difference. We need to be okay with this situation of people following different paths, and because these paths are slightly different. However, then what is that we're wishing for each other in loving kindness? If our understanding of hedonic and eudaimonic well-being is so different, well, the headings are still the same. We all need eudaimonic well-being, however we word it, however differently we word it. We do need that whole category of eudaimonic well-being, that's for sure. Otherwise, we are restless, we're unhappy, we're depressed, we're sad, we find no meaning in life, and eventually we experience horrible depressive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, and so forth. And in some cases, we harm ourselves, and sometimes irrevocably, because we're lacking eudaimonic well-being and the resources to find that. They're not provided to us for whatever reason. So that's that. We need eudaimonic well-being. And of course, we need hedonic well-being, a dignified, balanced form of hedonic well-being. Dignified, because we do need to at least have the amount of food and clothing and medicine and the company of others and shelter. And we can keep listing things, but these are some of the major ones that would make us feel like we're dignified human being. We have enough food, we have enough clothing, we have a normal place to stay in, a decent place to stay in. We have friends, we have access to information, to education, not just to information as in like whatever garbage is jumping at us from the screen of our mobile device, but actual education in terms of outer reality, inner reality, and so forth. So that, and balanced, because many of these types of hedonic well-being would eventually, hopefully, be balanced with what's sustainable for the planet. So we would reinvent food chains, systems of production, and so forth to salvage whatever is still salvageable on this planet and to preserve whatever is preservable in terms of the ecosphere and so forth. So that is also an important consideration there, because we can't just wish for everyone to have as many cars as they want and as many mobile phones as they want and so forth, because we know it is also arising against the backdrop of economic reality and ecological reality. That's, I would say, consideration from my theory car. There's the personal well-being, there's the economic well-being and ecological well-being, and we consider all three of those sort of in the same time. When we're talking about wishing, there's a question here in the chat. When we're talking about wishing for the causes of happiness, I'm assuming we're wishing them the ultimate cause of happiness as a nirvana or full awakening. Also, will you be talking about the causes of happiness? What are they? Well, I literally just did with regards to the general approach. And please remember that we're talking right now on a secular level. So if we gather a room where some people in the room are non-believers, some people are theistic believers, some people are Buddhists, and so forth, and I keep talking about the causes of nirvana, well, I've already violated the rules of the container, because the word causes of nirvana makes no sense and has no value for non-believers and for followers of the theistic traditions. That's why we've mentioned it in the description of the course, that in the first 10 classes, we're going to talk on a more general level, and the 11th class is specifically to focus on the very Buddhist aspects of the interpretation. And it's actually not my idea that I need to be mindful of this more general level first. It's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama says in his multiple books, but amongst those, the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, his wonderful series about the profound levels of Buddhist teachings, where he says we need to be very clearly aware of the fact that there are more non-believers, there are at least 1 billion non-believers on this planet, and we need to find some basic level to describe these things, the secular level, the level of secular ethics, as he himself calls it, for mental hygiene. That's where we find four immeasurables as well, amongst other things. And then beyond that, we can, as much as we want, discuss the causes of nirvana, absolutely. But we actually don't need to know the causes of nirvana to start practicing loving kindness. So that's our goal right now. Beyond that, of course, if we are followers of the Buddhist tradition, it is necessary to explore those ideas and work with them and integrate them in our practice. But were I to start suddenly talking about the causes of nirvana right now, that would be both out of place and out of time. So that's why for now we're just focusing on the general definition. What are the causes of happiness? Well, that depends on which happiness you mean. If you're talking about hedonic happiness, that's where we need to perfect our understanding of balanced, dignified hedonic well-being, right? So to understand the balanced part, we need to educate ourselves in matters of economy and ecology, or at least to have some general idea that we want our food and shelter and clothing and medicine and so forth to be procured in a way that is sustainable for the planet. That's more or less enough. These are actually the categories that the Buddha himself has listed with regards to hedonic well-being. Beyond that, for eudaimonic well-being, we could say, well, of course, Buddhism has some ideas about profound causes of happiness, and so does Christianity has its own ideas. And there are actually multiple interpretations there as well, and the Sufi tradition has them and so forth. But beyond that, on a more general level, we could say that mental hygiene, proper mental hygiene that cultivates the good qualities of our mind and that alleviates negative habits, that's the cause of eudaimonic well-being. That's what leads to eudaimonic well-being, cultivating the goodness and slowly removing the negative mental habits. Negative as in they bring suffering. So that's a very generic answer. However, why do we do the vision quest practice in session number 1? Why did we do it and why we will keep coming back to it? Because we need to, on our own, think, well, what's appropriate right now in my situation for balanced hedonic well-being and for eudaimonic well-being? Because maybe, yes, in general, we all need the same profound causes of eudaimonic well-being and hedonic well-being, but maybe right now I'm suffering from suicidal depression. And a specific step that I need to make on my way to profound, genuine well-being is to deal with that and find all the necessary types of help and support, which would not be true for the person practicing next to me, perhaps, because they are in a different mental and physical situation. And so they might not need the advice of depression / suicide counselor like I do. They need something else, maybe equally serious, but they need something else. So there are these things that we locate in space and time as part of the causal sequence leading to cause and condition. And it's important to not downplay it and not to deny it, because once again, I have had the experience of people in spiritual communities suffering from not only depression and suicidal thoughts, but also very serious psychological disorders, psychiatric disorders actually, that require, for the safety of the individual, some types of medication and a lot of talk therapy and other types of therapy. And the leadership of those communities, and these are not communities anyone present here is associated with, but I've come across situations like that in the past. But in those situations, the leadership said, oh no, all they need is meditate on like these Buddhist things, and that would change their mind. No, in some cases, causes of happiness and causes of suffering are more clearly defined than that. Just like with physical health, we wouldn't only heal ourselves through mantras and so forth in many cases, unless we're very advanced with mantras. We'd also go to a medical doctor, to a dentist and so forth. So we're both practical and visionary with it. So the visionary aspect is all of this stuff that has to do with nirvana. The practical side is doing the vision quest to see what we need right now. What are the habits that I can first change in myself? That's a very individual thing. And then with that, yes, moving towards boundless eudaimonic well-being, balanced, dignified hedonic well-being. That's what we wish for ourselves and for others. So how do we do that in practice? To generate loving kindness, we direct our attention towards an object. And with regards to the 4 immeasurables, an object is always a sentient being or a group of beings. And by sentient, here it means any being that has a mind. And then there's actually the question, well, how do we define that, right? Because we already had that discussion. Some people think that trees, and in fact, all plants have consciousness. And many people think otherwise. And because this is a shared container for people with different philosophical views, I'm not saying you should believe this or that. I can only comment on the standard Buddhist view of things. And actually, there are some Buddhist branches that have different views on that point. But I can comment on what Buddhists think about that. But beyond that, if you think that trees and bushes and so forth have consciousness, no one in this course needs to be a Buddhist. That's to quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2012. He said, I don't care about all of you becoming Buddhists. What I do care about is all of you becoming ethical people. So to paraphrase that, the purpose of this 10-week course is not for all of us to become Buddhists. If we are Buddhists, wonderful, 4 immeasurables will enrich our practice. But if we're not, we can at least all become develop greater familiarity with the 4 immeasurables and become kinder, more compassionate, more ethical, more wise people through that. Wouldn't that be good? But we choose an object, whoever we think is a sentient being, and at least we know humans and animals. That's where we start. Beyond that, absolutely, we can include many more categories. And Buddhists do include many more categories of invisible beings and so forth. But at least let's start with humans, for example, because we do know humans exist and they have feelings. Of course, we also know that about animals. So that would also be a very important thing to integrate eventually. But traditionally, usually we actually start with humans and sometimes with humans closest to us. especially with this human sitting here for each one of us. We remind ourselves of our own existence and we say, hey, I'm the first object in this practice. I start by cultivating loving kindness for myself. And so we attend to this object. And instead of simply being aware of the fact that there is a being sitting here, okay, there's a Lobsang Tenpa here. I mean, Lobsang Tenpa is just a name, but there's a body, a mind, and this label of Lobsang Tenpa glued to them. So there's a being there. That's a neutral awareness. Just knowing someone is present. That's not enough. That's not loving kindness. I need to modulate it, to transform this type of awareness into something else, into awareness that would be loving kindness itself. So how do I do that? I transform my awareness of myself into awareness of myself wherein I wish for myself to be happy and have the causes of happiness. If your worldview already includes things like what are the causes of nirvana, what is the profound causes of happiness in past and future lives, and so forth, all of that Buddhist stuff, or equally similar ideas from Christianity, from Islam, from Hinduism, and so forth, you integrate that. On a secular level, we know if we had 100 people do the vision quest, they would develop their own individual answers to those 4 questions. So everybody has some kind of vision of how they might reach eudaimonic and hedonic well-being. Okay, so we start with that. Knowing that I have some answers to those questions, that's why I did that practice, hopefully multiple times, I can now wish for myself to be happy and have the causes of happiness. Eventually, we'll be able to wish that even without using too many words. We'll just already know how that awareness that is that intention, that is that aspiration, how it feels. We'll be able to switch it even without needing to use phrases and so forth. That will come with a lot of practice for most of us. However, initially, most people prefer to use a key or a phrase or a simple verbal thought such as, may I have happiness and the causes of happiness, or may I be happy. In the Pali tradition, sometimes just that simple phrase is used, may I be happy. The Tibetan tradition likes to add the component about the causes of happiness because that brings us an aspect of cognitive intelligence, clearly seeing reality and especially the causal nature of reality. Oh, happiness comes from causes. So let's integrate that in the phrase. And since we're going to be using it a lot, with each repetition, we're actually going to be reminding ourselves, hey, there's a causal progression there. If you want happiness, you need the causes. It's quite logical. So that's why that element is added. It's not added everywhere, but it is added in the Tibetan tradition. So then would say, attending to ourselves as this object, or attending to any other being. Eventually, we do project this practice to other beings. May I have happiness and the causes of happiness, or may you have happiness and the causes of happiness, or may they, and eventually may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. When we truly make the phrase, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness alive for us, when it is generated with incredible intensity and incredible sincerity, that's when it is loving kindness, immeasurable loving kindness, boundless loving kindness. When it's not incredibly intense yet, it's more of an aspiration, more of a, one day I'll be truly able to wish everyone happiness and joy and well-being and their causes. But now it's more of a formal thought. Okay, sure. Until then, as I've said, we're practicing loving kindness aspirationally. But to build the bridge across that gap, to close that gap between what we have now with even barely being able to truly wish it for ourselves and the other side of the spectrum where with equal intensity towards all beings, boundless, incredible, powerful field, boundless field of this aspirational energy. To build that, we go through specific stages that we're going to discuss next time. Actually, several different sequences that could be used, but we're going to discuss the most common one next time. And for now, we're going to mostly focus on ourselves. That's the first step that is recommended, not just as some people believe in self-help versions of this practice or in popular books or in watered down books. No. In some of the root texts in the Tibetan tradition, it says, start with yourself, as in start projecting qualities, loving kindness and compassion for yourself, truly train in that. And then with that, you'll be able to expand them to others, extend them to others. Because As the Buddha himself pointed out, he who truly loves himself would not harm another. So once we generate genuine loving kindness for ourselves, our loving kindness for others would become quite powerfully supported and nourished as well. So we can benefit a lot from working with ourselves a lot, and especially if we suffer from things like anxiety attacks, doubts, self-doubt, a lot of self-doubt perhaps, sabotaging our practice, it's being hard on ourselves and being hard on others perhaps, because we're so hard on ourselves, of course we'd be hard on others. Logical progression. So if we suffer from things like that, there's always room to practice a lot of loving kindness for ourselves, to truly dwell in it, to truly work with it, to enjoy it, to embrace it. And we're going to embrace it throughout this week. That's going to be our home play practice. But before that, a little bit more just on the technique of generating it. So as I've mentioned, the root is just generating that aspirational awareness. To go straight into it for many of us is a bit difficult. Instead, we try to go directly into loving kindness, but we end up in just some vague, gooey, feel-good state that lacks that intensity of aspiration. We think we're dwelling in love, but where we're dwelling it's very amorphous. It's very, kind of good, but there's no intentionality of may you gain happiness and the causes of happiness. That part is absent. So to add that intensity and clarity, that's why we can use such thoughts as may I have happiness and the causes of happiness. Or Dr. Wallace sometimes suggests a very wonderful version of it, which is may I be well and happy. And well there then denotes hedonic well-being, very necessary, not to be ignored. And happy denotes eudaimonic well-being. So may I find that both hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, very necessary, right? There is a question here about Buddhist position on abortion, but unfortunately, first of all, we're very limited in terms of time, and absolutely, I would not like to. You can Google stuff very easily and so forth. There are multiple considerations there. Like any other complicated issue, that's a thing where we bring in a lot of wisdom, compassion, and we do systemic analysis of each individual case. That's the brief response. Each individual case, we bring to it wisdom and compassion, and then we decide what's best in each individual situation. That's as much as I'm willing to go as a male identifying person commenting on the issue that has to do with women's bodies. So, and also it has nothing, it in a way has to do, of course, everything to do with loving kindness and compassion, but we need to focus on the material actually. So we have these remaining 4 minutes. So for that duration, coming back to this point, we can support generation of loving kindness just by the very brief thought of may I, may you, may L, or use more elaborate phrases, which is what some teachers suggest. So you would, for example, if once again, you're reading books by Sharon Salzberg, and she wrote a lot about loving kindness practice and popularized it to a great degree, which is truly wonderful. But you would find more elaborate versions of phrases there. And in traditional sources from the Pali tradition, which go all the way back to specific teachings of the Buddha himself, you would find, for example, a fourfold formula where we say, may I be free from animosity. May I be free from affliction, from the afflictive. May I be free from anxiety. And finally, may I live happily, or may I be happy. So instead of just one phrase, one short phrase, such as may I be well and happy, or may I have happiness and the causes of happiness, sometimes we would see much more elaborate phrases, usually three or four phrases combined. And then we use them on a loop to generate this energy of aspirational energy of loving kindness. Beyond that, elaborate aspirational formulas sometimes used. So in some traditions, and in some books actually available in English, you would have books where there's a list of aspirations that goes on and on and on for several pages. And as practitioners slowly read through that, after each phrase, they make a pause, they generate that wish, that aspiration, then they go to the next phrase, and then go through multiple pages of that. That is also sometimes used, but that is used more often as, for example, a final ceremony for some big event or a retreat, for instance, or just to actually send kindness out into the world on a special day, like a special Buddha day, special holiday, a special ceremony, one's birthday, and so forth. Instead of for training in loving kindness that is also an attentional practice, like we're doing now. And also, of course, in some practices, we would describe visualizations that could be used. So that is something that you've mentioned initially when we're doing the original exchange and sharing our points and points from our practice. It is absolutely possible to use some types of visualization to project loving kindness. However, that's where we try to be balanced with it. Just like we want to be balanced with phrases, that's why there is a suggestion to keep them truly wise, truly clear, not too many. We need to be able to memorize them. We need to use them in our own language and so forth. Otherwise, it's all over the place. And with elaborate aspirational formulas, even with that, even though it's a very elaborate system and it's actually not perfectly good for cultivating concentration, but it is good for sending out vast aspirations for the world. Even with those, there's still a balance to be maintained. And first of all, how they're formulated, but also how we focus on them. So there's always that a question of balance that we bring into this. And that's one of the keyword, one of the hashtags for any teaching with Dr. Wallace, of course, who calls himself facetiously Balance Walla, rearranging the names of his first and last name with good reason. It is constantly about finding that balance. And as we practice loving kindness for ourselves, so you'll get the recordings for that, and we will work with them, all of us, me as well, and then we'll discuss our experience, hopefully. As we work with that, for example, in attending to what we feel when we do get hard news about something, right? We attend to ourselves as a person. We generate these wishes through a short phrase or an elaborate phrase. And we constantly try to keep ourselves balanced in that we're trying to not start, for example, just repeating the phrase again and again and again meaninglessly. That would be one extreme. But also, we don't want to lose the formula, the phrase, the thought completely and then just rest in a gooey, dull state. That's also not balanced. That's also an extreme. So in between those, we return to the thought when necessary to generate that version of awareness that we need, and we maintain it. And it starts to dissipate. We use the wording, the phrase, the thought again to generate that intensity. We hold it again, starts to dissipate. And we're constantly rebalancing the mind from the extremes of excitation and dullness. That's why loving kindness is a shamatha practice. But the object our awareness is resting on, and we're going to repeat that again next time, but I'm going to say it now, and that will be the concluding thought. The object that our awareness is resting on is not the phrase, and it's not the visualization, and it's not the elaborate aspirational formulas. It's the being that these things are directed at. The being is the object. So in this case, when I practice loving kindness for myself, I'm the being. So just for 1 second, and I know we're already late, but just to seal on an auspicious note, let's just think without even changing our position, closing the eyes necessarily, or anything like that. Let's for a moment just together think, may I have happiness and the causes of happiness. Truly wishing that. And then, also aspirationally, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. And then also wishing, may every moment that we've spent together in this class, may we use it to cultivate not just our compassion and love, of course, and joy and equanimity, but also our discerning wisdom. And combining those qualities, may we bring healing to this world. So that would be a lovely aspiration to work on, to follow through as we go through the next 7 days practicing, looking at our minds, trying to bring loving kindness to ourselves, and then discussing all of that if something felt right or if something felt problematic. So once again, my deepest gratitude to all of you for spending these, I almost said 7 days with me, these 2 hours of very intense learning with me, and of course, some practice and all of that, discussion, asking wonderful questions. Not all of them I have been able to address to the same degree, but what to do, I'll do my best. But that's where our own wisdom and compassion kick in, because we apply them to these questions and we find answers and we keep learning. Moment by moment, we explore all these topics and considerations. But hopefully some of it was enjoyable and helpful. And we'll continue next time by first still delving deeply into loving kindness. And then from that, with this pattern or this general understanding of loving kindness, applying that equally to compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity, and also the topics of wisdom and so forth. So my deepest gratitude to all of you, wishing you all a beautiful day, night, morning, anything else. Lots of joy in your practice, for your body and mind to feel well. Thank you so much for all the birthday wishes. It's very kind. And hoping to see you soon in our next class together. So thank you for joining, and please enjoy loving kindness practice. I hope it would bring some benefit.